Welcome to Happy Times and Places, the final part of this anniversary shindig in which I, Toby Hadoke, have gathered as many people as possible to watch An Unearthly Chld and tell me their 5 favourite things about it. Now then, I completed my task of getting a birthday greeting from a classic companion from every era of the show, but the new series, that's going to be beyond me, isn't it? I don't move in those kinds of circles.
Toby, it's John Bishop. Listen, I just want to wish you and everyone else who's listening to this 60th anniversary podcast on Doctor Who all the very best and happy anniversary. What a journey. See you soon, mate. All the best, bye.
Oh, well, it seems those 20-odd years on the comedy circuit that have nothing to do with Doctor Who weren't wasted after all. And so here we are for the final part of this epic 60th anniversary celebration of An Unearthly Chld. There have been special events, there have been BBC-sanctioned celebrations, there have been treats galore, and then in this tiny corner of the internet there's a rather unfashionable middle-aged man just talking a lot about one set of 25 minutes. But I have asked some people along, notably at the top of the show there, I remember when John Bishop used to mock me for, like, in fact, I've got a video, in fact, where he makes a sort of pointed comment about the fact that I'm always going on about Doctor Who, and it's not the same guy who was interviewed by Doctor Who magazine and went, I've always been a fan, you know. But anyway, that I will keep for bribery purposes in years to come. Good old John. He is genuinely actually one of the good guys. I had the great pleasure of I saw him in Panto not that long ago, and I was just hanging around, and I didn't even bother to go over to I think it was the first night, so the actors were around. There was a bit of a do that I was at, and he called me over and we had a great chat. I hadn't expected him to have the time, so didn't even try, but we had a lovely old chat. He's still the same guy who, when he started as a comic, he hit the ground running. He was already, he started headlining gigs very, very quickly, and I booked him in for mine, and there was a bit of a mess up, and so actually he rang to say, am I on tonight? And I was like, oh God, I've made a mistake, and I'd got a cancellation the following week. He went, no, it's all right, I'll do the following week. So he came and did the following week, and in between that, I actually lost my venue, or I lost the financial backing of the venue, so I was suddenly in big, big trouble, but the show had to go on, and it was just going to cost me money, and I was still waiting on tables in those days. And he did his set, and he absolutely stormed it, and he was the headline act, for which you got in those days £100, and I gave him £100, and he took a tenner out, and he said, I've heard you've been having a bit of trouble, and he said, babysitter cost me a tenner, and gave me the rest of it back, and that was the first time I'd met him at that point. That's a measure of the sort of fellow that John is, and I've not been disappointed since, and I've gigged with him many, many times. He's an exceptional stand-up comic, and I venture to say television always removes something from somebody's stand-up. He's great on telly, but he's absolutely brilliant live. But he's a very, very nice man, and so I was overjoyed and a little bit, is everybody I know going to be in Doctor Who first? But when I saw him appear at in that teaser that said John Bishop's going to be in Doctor Who soon, and I texted him immediately, and he was very sweet, saying that if I'd got his seal of approval, he would be happy. So that was very nice, and he's not the only comic appearing on this anniversary podcast, because I asked loads of people from different walks of life, but mostly from Doctor Who, and I asked that wonderful comedian Robin Ince, and Robin is a scatterbrain, and he said, oh yeah, I'll do it, and I sent him a final reminder, and got an email saying, I've texted you, and he has texted me. He hasn't texted me 5 things. Now, it may be that they're still in his outbox. It may be that he started and then forgot, but I don't know, because I hassled him so much. I didn't want to hassle him again, and now the time has passed. So what we've got a sort of tantalising glimpse of what could have been, which again is appropriate. You can make anything appropriate when it comes to the first episode of Doctor Who. An abandoned take, if I do a bit twice, do a bit twice to make it better, or repeat a bit just to re-emphasize it. We could do it all, except for In fact, I intend to be less abrasive in this final instalment than I was in the first. But Robin, I've just got 2 texts from Robin. So here's Robin Ince, wonderful comedian. Thanks to Robin for giving me this much of his time. Robin says, my first favourite thing about Unearthly, having got used to so many other TARDISes, was seeing the original interior was roomier and emptier and looked more like an ideal home exhibition display of a TARDIS for all the family from MFI, or This is the TARDIS of the Future. Also, having grown up with Tom Baker, who had some similarities to my nice grandmother, though her curls were permed, not natural, Hartnell reminded me of my nasty grandmother, who looked over her French fancy at us with disappointment and disdain. There we go. That's what I got from Robin. So, thanks, Robin. I hope you didn't have more. And if you did, well, we'll include it when you do the story that you have chosen for Happy Times and Places that you still haven't done yet, which I now expect to get in bits, like the key to time. I'll just have to gather it and then put them all together at the end and do some ill-advised overacting that somebody should have reined in. So thanks to Robin Ince, and thanks to everybody who has contributed to this. And we have 5 guests and then another guest to see out this celebration of that very first episode, where, as a reminder, I have asked everybody to choose their 5 favourite things in true Happy Times and Places style. If you want to hear the commentary, that is in the first episode of this 60th anniversary celebration, where I commentate through the episode and get the thoughts of Jim Saxter, who'd chosen the other 3 episodes in a previous segment of Happy Times and Places. And then in subsequent instalments, I move through various Doctor Who fans, people who are Doctor Who fans and writers and other creatives, and all sorts of just smart, entertaining people, some of whom have contributed to Happy Times and Places before, and some of whom have not. And the next 2 actually fit into the latter category. They have not contributed to Happy Times and Places before. In fact, nobody this episode has. A couple of people have promised that they will and haven't yet, but actually nobody in this episode has done Happy Times and Places before. So if you are a veteran listener, there's still going to be some new voices, which I thought was important and good fun. So first up is a writer of a bona fide excellent episode of Doctor Who. And I hope he's going to introduce himself. And Torchwood too. He's done a lot. Let's see what he says about himself.
Hello, I'm James Moran, and I wrote The Fires of Pompeii back when David Tennant was in Doctor Who the first time. Can you just imagine seeing An Unearthly Chld for the first time? Getting to meet the Doctor in the same way as every other character in the show does from here on in. Those first few shots when we see the TARDIS, but we're not seeing the TARDIS. We are just seeing a police box. The audience at the time has no idea what they're in for. They don't know it's a spaceship. They don't know what's in there. It just looks like some junk in a junkyard. They have no clue about the adventure they're about to go on. It starts out so small, so ordinary, with normal people in a setting we all recognise, and then it goes absolutely wild. That first moment they walk through the police box doors to find out they're in a much larger room, it still sends chills down the spine no matter how many times you see variations on it. It's just magical. All the ingredients of the show are there right from the very start. They land somewhere they didn't mean to, they get caught up in a tricky situation, and they're off to the next adventure. Everything the show becomes later is all here in the opening episodes. The DNA was always right there from the start. It's packed with imagination, infinite possibilities, pure joy. It's a lot to pack in, but that's okay. The show is much, much bigger on the inside, and it always will be. Happy 60th.
Thanks, James. So that was more of a sort of précis of the whole thing, but I'm happy with that. Yes, so thanks to James for choosing a sort of all-encompassing favourite eulogy about An Unearthly Chld, and he's quite right. It is extraordinary. Is there anybody that doesn't like the first episode and who doesn't agree that it encapsulates everything about the show so well? It's probably not got as many jokes. It's not a sort of quirky fun, but it's again, Ian kind of provides that. There's a few of his little sort of throwaway lines that just add a little sort of peppiness, a little sort of comedic swagger to it that it desperately needs. And Hartnell is a bit absent-minded, but it's still sort of slightly icy detachment, and you know, where he is a bit sort of it does come with a sort of sneering disdain, even though he is slightly sort of dotty and forgettable. There's a darkness to it, but no, William Russell gives it its sort of its spring, if you like. But it is pitch perfect. James is right. Oh, and I've just I was trying to think of the word peppy for in just a moment. I was trying to describe Tom Burgess about 3 episodes ago, wasn't I? And I said humble is the wrong word, and then the right word didn't come. He's unassuming. Tom Burgess is unassuming. That's sort of only a little bit late that I have to give you the correct word, but. Insert some joke about, well, it took me a couple of goes to get it right, but then I did, etc., which I've done many of during this, and I will never be allowed to do again once I stop talking about An Unearthly Chld, which will be in about an hour, he said optimistically. It's got to be in about an hour, because as I record this, because you'll notice I did some of this epic at different points on the 23rd of November, but this that I'm doing now, this last bit, because I was then having to edit it and blah, blah, blah. And I've told you when and where I have been. This last section is in the countdown to the Star Beast, which is on, as I record this, in about an hour and 15 minutes. And so I'm not going to get through all of these now, but I will knit them together. And I don't know whether it will be a jarring edit or whether you won't even notice. But certainly the recording of the start of this final episode of this 60th celebration podcast is in the build up to the Star Beast on the celebratory weekend of Doctor Who's 60th. So we're actually past the day now. As I say, I'd intended to do it all before, and would have felt slightly because like it was a bit of a bit of a cheat, because I normally watch the episode at 5:15 on the 23rd, and because I was going to have to watch it beforehand, I thought that would take away from some of its luster. Well, I actually did, as you heard. I started doing this just before midnight on the 23rd, and then later bits of this I did after I'd done my rewatch, my actual watch, without commentating through it at the right time. So I've actually seen it twice. And now, after the anniversary is gone and the Daleks have come on in colour and Adventure in Space and Time has been on with Ncuti Gatwa, I'm now building up to the new era of Doctor Who. It's almost as exciting as when Rose was on. I was thinking about what I watched the day of Rose, which was, I tried to watch the Armageddon Factor because I thought I'll watch one I don't really know that well, and I chose the Armageddon Factor as one I wasn't overly familiar with, and I got halfway through episode 2, was a bit bored, and then my friend John came round who'd never seen Enemy of the World 3, so we watched that. And I think we may have watched another Orphaned Troughton, either Web of Fear 1 or Space Pirates 2, I can't remember, but there was a couple of Orphaned Troughtons he hadn't seen. Well, if it was Enemy and Web, well, my goodness, we made them eventually come back. So what I should do now is watch all the single episodes from stories we've only got bits of, and then they will return 10 years later. Anyway, so Robin didn't quite see it through. James has given me a bit more of a précis. Let's hope my next guest can give us, and this is entirely my fault, because I was, flying out messages, and obviously I didn't listen or read anything back that I was given, so I couldn't tell people whether they were right or wrong or whatever. And actually, there's no right or wrong way to do it. But we are after, generally, 5 things about An Unearthly Child, and and we'll see if we get some sort of consensus at the moment. The opening few minutes, the school children, the sound maybe seem to be doing better than most things, but there's lots of things that have only been chosen the once. The quartet and William Hartnell are vying with each other to see who wins. Ian and Barbara have had a few votes as well, but let's see who wins out. The next person is a bona fide Doctor Who writer of the new series, writer of lots of stuff in the orbit of the show and important parts of Doctor Who's life in home media, shall we say. I will allow him to introduce himself, and he may tell you some of that.
Hello, Toby. It's Pete McTighe here. I'm going to tell you about my 5 favourite things about An Unearthly Child. And they're all going to be really obvious, sorry, but they are the best things about the episode, I think. So my first favourite thing about this episode has to be the music, the title music. I mean, it's hard to put it in perspective now when we're living in a time where, you know, any sound can be sampled and messed around with on our phones. This was a time when sound editing was achieved by physically splicing tape. But the Doctor Who theme, it's just an astounding achievement. I think it's a great composition by Ron Grainer, but brought to life, kind of kicking and screaming and warping and whooshing and spangling by Delia Derbyshire, that genius and pioneer. It's still 60 years on, it's like nothing else on television, and it's endured. There's been 20 odd different versions over the years, and it's one of the most recognizable themes in the history of television to this day. And this original version, frankly, hasn't really been beaten, has it? Let's be honest.
Warping and whooshing and spangling. Oh, you see, Pete, it doesn't matter if you choose what you say are the obvious things or what you think might have been chosen by everybody else. It's the way that each individual contributor expresses themselves. Warping and whooshing and spangling. I love that. And yet the theme has done very, very well in this celebration. And right that it should. And it is extraordinary how it's remained. It is extraordinary how that original has never really been beaten, no matter how bigger and fuller it gets. But they did try, didn't they, to use or they did. I know that the bootleg of Rose that came out, which I didn't see. Do you know what? I held myself back. I thought I'd waited long enough. I could wait another week. Did have the original theme on, didn't it? And they said it appeared quite empty for the sort of busyness of the modern image. And I can understand that actually the old theme might not work in today's setting. It is a relic of the past, but can still never be beaten. And I had a program on Radio 4 Extra called The A to Z of Surviving Doctor Who and A to Z, and I chose the theme under D for Diddly Dum, and they asked me, I cut a bit because it was overrunning, where I put it in that list of theme tunes that you can sing the title, the Sweeney, the Sweeney. The Sweeney, the Sweeney, the Sweeney, EastEnders, EastEnders, EastEnders. And then, of course, you've got Doctor Who, Doctor Who, Doctor Who, Doctor Who, I'm diddly dum, I'm Doctor Who, I'm Doctor Who, Doctor Who, diddly dum, I'm Doctor Who, Doctor... Yeah, there. And they probably cut it for a reason, but it's an observation I don't want to be wasted. Ha ha ha. Pete, by the way, who just introduced himself by name, wrote Kablam and Praxeus, two of my favourite episodes of the Jodie Whittaker era. I think it was Doctor Who doing a story set in Amazon was absolutely a great call, and we have a slight personal connection with it too, because Julie Hesmond-Talge is a friend of ours, and she was in it. I remember her popping up in that post-title thing of it being, oh, now here's who's coming up in Doctor Who. I was like, oh, yay, somebody else I know is going to be in Doctor Who. Everyone I know is going to be in Doctor Who. And Praxeus, I think, is hugely underrated. I don't know. I've seen it get some stick in some quarters. I think the bit where the two kids say, oh, we're about to go on holiday, and then they're around the beautiful unspoilt place, and they see loads of plastic waste. I think Doctor Who doing a story about microplastics is absolutely the right call. It's a really great thing to be doing. And the scene where the cadaver of the travelling girl, is there and collapses, I think is a really frightening thing. And I really enjoyed Praxeus. I thought it was a smart story that I was surprised to see get some opprobrium from some quarters. So Pete is somebody I would definitely like to see writing Doctor Who. I only met him very, very recently, and I've met him a couple of times since, but he does, of course, the trailers. Essentially, to call them trailers seems a bit insulting. The mini films that herald the new Blu-ray box sets, which have led to, I don't know if they were direct lead, but certainly I see they have kinship with the Tales of the TARDIS that have just gone on iPlayer, that Pete also wrote a couple of, and I think did a beautiful job with. So I'm thrilled that Pete has given his time for this, and he's always very encouraging of my stuff, and always replies to an email, and is a thoroughly nice chap. And I hope we see more of Pete's name. I mean, he started off, I think he did, didn't he? He didn't start. He came to my attention designing covers, I think, for the late stage DVD releases. But a man of many talents, and is now, a showrunner. He did, he did the excellent series, the Pact, which I thought was absolutely fantastic, and has written for lots and lots of other TV, and exec and produced lots of other TV. So I'd love it if he continued his association with Doctor Who, and I'm really thrilled that he still does sort of Blu-ray trailer level stuff, because we really benefit from him. And I've enjoyed chatting to him, and I was surprised but very happy that he sent me his thoughts, because he's a busy man who's doing a lot of stuff. And let's see what his second choice is.
My second favourite thing is the police box. What a strange choice and a strange conceit, but also pure genius. And I don't mean the TARDIS, because that's a spaceship, and there's many a spaceship in TV science fiction. I mean specifically the police box exterior. I think that is a stroke of genius. It's something so kind of everyday. Even now we can relate it to phone boxes, something that's so kind of mundane, but in becoming this iconic piece of pop culture, it's also become kind of beautiful. I mean, for me, it is an object of absolute beauty, that blue police box, wherever it's sitting, whether it's in a field, in an alleyway, on an alien planet. It's utterly iconic, and I love it. And I do want one as my garden shed, but I'm having trouble getting that past my partner.
Pete, do you know what? Nobody's chosen the police box. So obvious nobody chose it, but it's an absolutely... So, one, don't be apologetic about choosing your things, because they may not occur to others, even though it seems blindingly obvious to choose the police box. Nobody has, because there are so many casual bits of genius in Doctor Who that we take some of them for granted. And I think the fact that the Doctor travels in a rackety police box, although I always say a rackety police box because I like to suggest that it's a bit threadbare, and this is how I, view my sense of where I fit in the world. But actually, quite often the TARDIS is not remotely threadbare, and it's big, and it's robust, and it's beautifully painted, and it's pin sharp and looks as good as new, and the lines and contours are all straight, and it's an impressive piece of kit. But it also has been very ramshackle at times. But I think it has a charm about it. It has a charm because of where it's from. The time that it is from. The fact that and I think Doctor Who works because it's a bit British and old-fashioned. And I make no apologies for that. And I mean the best of old-fashioned things and the best of British things. I know both things can bring with them issues and difficulties, but I'm talking about the positive sides, and we can always go, yes, but what about, if we want to, but I don't want to about these on this occasion, so let's not, whilst being aware of the complication, duality, etc. But it is an absolute, because they could have chosen anything. They could have chosen anything contemporary, and of course they're out of date now. Kids don't know what a police box is, and yet it doesn't seem like a relic. You don't look at it and think, what's that thing from long ago? Because we still do have sort of phone boxes. Well, actually do. Yeah, I think we do. And we still have pillar boxes. So it still looks like it sort of fits in the 21st century, in urban 21st century, even though it doesn't, even though you don't really see them on the streets. I know there's one or two. Because it's still, because that shape and those colours, they're sort of, it's British Royal Stamp of Approval, Lion's Mark, sort of colours, aren't they? The reds of the pillar boxes, the blues of police boxes. They have a certain. These have been franked and made and coloured by someone official in Whitehall or whatever. And it's because it's a functional box, but that has a charm because it's a beautiful design, because we made things nicely in those days as well. But that crucially looks out of place wherever it lands. It crucially does the complete opposite of what the chameleon circuit, as it became known, is designed to do, which is to blend the machine in with its background. It got stuck as an obsolete police box in a junkyard, And so as a result, instead of blending in, it sticks out. It creates a visual dissonance immediately. It crosses the mundane with the spectacular immediately. It is a shorthand to saying this show is presenting you with a world that is at odds, where different things collide, where the things that you take for granted, the things that are usual, you are going to see in a different way, sometimes in a quirky way, but sometimes in an absolutely terrifying way, whether it be a statue or a gas mask or a shop window dummy or a telephone flex or a plastic daffodil or whatever. And yet it also is very charming. It's like a dinky toy, and they're sort of charming and old-fashioned, but childish, you see. And so it is a brilliant visual shorthand. It looks great. When I did that Troughton in Tibet documentary that Chris Chapman kindly asked me to do, and we ended up in that small piece of Wales where every piece of location for the Abominable Snowmen was done within a stone's throw of itself. And the TARDIS was erected where the TARDIS had been erected when the Troughton film crew visited there back in 1967. Looking at that TARDIS, just there, just in that valley, just against those hillocks and those stone edifices, and that stretching distance of the valley down below, it looked amazing. It looked incongruous but beautiful. It looked strange yet comforting. It looked bizarre yet not ridiculous, and it put such a smile on my face to see it, and then to have to be walking over the hill and for Fraser Hines to see it for the first time and to without thinking about it run towards it was really, really beautiful. And that to me, I looked at it and thought, God, I've seen this thing so many times. I've touched a TARDIS, I've seen a TARDIS, I've watched it on the telly, but to actually see it there and be there at this moment with this thing there, and I can get closer to it and further away from it, it visually it is a gift that never stops giving, and it is charming and wonderful. And because of that very simple practical idea of going, well, we can't build a new spaceship every time. What should we have? It needs to be something that's bigger on the inside than on the outside, but they still need to get into it. And it's an absolute stroke of genius that the TARDIS is a police box, and it sums up Doctor Who completely. And I love the TARDIS. So good choice, James, but nobody chose it. Pete, sorry, good choice, Pete. But nobody had chosen the TARDIS being a police box. So you see, nothing is too obvious.
My third favourite thing about Unearthly Child has to be William Hartnell, obviously, the governor. Who called him that? I think it was Colin Baker, maybe? I can't remember. But he is the governor. If it wasn't, for this gripping central performance, we wouldn't be talking about and enjoying watching new episodes of the show today, 60 years later. I think he made the Doctor instantly mysterious, but twinkly. And yes, he softened over time quite quickly, but he's just striking in this first episode. It's utterly magnetic, and he establishes characteristics I think that most other Doctors fall back on from time to time. I think it's really clear from watching him in this story that he poured his heart and soul into this role, and I think you can really see that even when later on in his era, right at the end, he's tired and ill and he's soldiering on, you can still see him working all the time. He's getting lines wrong and he's stumbling and he's fumbling, but he's pushing forward. He's never phoning it in, not ever, not for 1 second. And I think, we owe him a great debt, and we should all raise a glass to him on this and every anniversary, I think.
That is a lovely thought, and yes, we should, because there would be no Doctor Who without William Hartnell. It's funny, often, Doctors try and put a bit of Hartnell into their performance, and I think Davison does a very good impersonation of him in Castrovalva, and both Colin Baker and Peter Capaldi sort of invoked him when they said, well, we want to be a bit spiky because that's what the Doctor was originally like. But watching it this time, when I watched it for real at 16 minutes past 5 on the 23rd of November 2023, I noticed there's a bit that he does in the TARDIS when he sort of goes and sort of draws his mouth downwards and does a sort of oh sort of thing that's very like what Tom Baker does. Now, I don't think Tom Baker is aping William Hartnell, and in fact, because I'd never really noticed it before, it seemed to me like William Hartnell was prefiguring Tom Baker, rather, even though that is, of course, impossible. But it was lovely how I could see an element, because Tom Baker does this sort of moochy kind of, okay, and will sort of draw his mouth down and sort of, lope down as if to go, okay, I'm taking that in my stride. And Hartnell does it, and I thought, that's really interesting that I can sort of see a pre-echo of Tom Baker. I mean, Terence Dicks always said Doctor Who fans see patterns where there are none, but that's okay. That's the joy, and I'd noticed that this time round, and I'd never noticed it before. But that's why Hartnell's performance is so interesting, and Troughton did an amazing job in that he takes over from Hartnell and establishes that it can be played by somebody else. But you are having to take over from somebody who had made such an impact that, that is what Doctor Who was. Doctor Who and William Hartnell were one in the same and nothing else. And so, well done Innes Lloyd for deciding, when he recast to go completely different, because then each actor could bring their personality to the Doctor. But in establishing the parameters of the character, which is, eccentric, otherworldly, sense of mystery, a sense of sort of crabby impatience with the shortcomings of the lesser species, which is us. All of that is stuff that kind of still acts as a through line with the Doctor right to the present day. And at the present day, it's about to be David Tennant again. And then who knows what Ncuti Gatwa will be like, because I've no idea. And that is very exciting. But let us never forget in our excitement for Doctors New that we wouldn't have any of them were it not for Doctors Old, particularly that first one. And I absolutely agree with raising a glass to William Hartnell.
Sidney Newman, I think we have a lot to thank him for. He's obviously the godfather of Doctor Who, and the other person we should be raising a glass to. But what I love about him is that he let them shoot the pilot and then sat down and said, actually, you know what? It's not good enough. And he could have let it slide. He could have let that pilot go out undercooked, but he didn't. At vast expense, he said they could do it again and get it right. And that's an incredible thing to have done in 1963, to have spent that money on doing it again, taken that risk. And he was right, and look where we are now. The man's a genius.
Well, this was a very interesting thing. I sort of was re-emphasised to me because I'd read the fine work of other people who went before. The House Dammers Walker and Jeremy Bentham and all those guys who wrote the early history of Doctor Who as we know it. But it was when going over a lot of that stuff for myself, and it was interesting how often we're told of that, it was only ever going to run for 13 weeks. And in fact, that was the case at one point. But the original plan, when Newman was launching it, and I think one of the earliest, if not the earliest time we read about it in one of the trade papers, is that it's going to be made for a year. It is not. I think we sometimes like to sell it of, it was this runt of the drama department that the kids department didn't make it. The drama department didn't want to make it. It's got these young pups, Verity Lambert and Maurice Hussein and Richard Martin. They're all John Gorrie. They're all young directors. They're all young personnel on this program that nobody really had much faith in. Newman had commissioned it and envisaged it for a year. It's only when the drama department and head of programming and people like that start looking at the figures, and the TARDIS costs so much, and the actors aren't hired for a year. They're only hired for short term, so they're getting itchy feet and going, well, come on, you've got to commit or we'll be off. That they sort of go, okay, well, you can have 13 weeks, and then it's like, you can have a couple more, and then it goes to 26, I think. But and it's gradually increased by Donald Baverstock, but that's as a result of how it starts to pan out. Originally, the plan is to make it for a year, and that's so Newman's vision wasn't, let's see if we can, this is just a crappy thing we're making, and I hope it does all right. Newman had big plans for it, and obviously that's part of his motive for going to making that extraordinary move of going, okay, redo it, remount it. No recasting. Now that would have been interesting, wouldn't it? If they'd had some different actors and gone for it again with different actors, and then we go, oh, what would it have been like if Penelope Lee or Philida Law had played Barbara or whatever? But yeah, it shows a great amount of faith and guts for Newman, but also a stubbornness and and a drive that meant that Doctor Who wasn't this accidental program. There was a lot of resources and a lot of energy and a lot of commitment and faith marshalled to make it work. And yes, there were obviously objections within other parts of the BBC, but it wasn't an accident that it came together. It came together because of an ambitious, commercially minded, bloody minded head of drama called Sidney Newman, who's also, we know whose idea it was. I remember the Guardian obituary said, "Oh, he greenlit Doctor Who," and I remember thinking he didn't greenlight it. He put the bulb in. He wired it. But good call, Pete, because nobody, Pete, nobody has mentioned Sidney Newman until now. So it's a good job you came along.
My last favourite thing about Unearthly Child is, of course, the cliffhanger. This cliffhanger is the first of many. I love the Saturday matinee serialness of it all in these early days. And this cliffhanger is so simple and so effective and instantly becomes an integral part of the programme even to this day. Even now, when we have standalone episodes, we usually have little mini cliffhangers as cold opens that lead into the title music. That kind of storytelling, that build to a cliffhanger has influenced my writing ever since I saw my first one in 1979 when the Daleks burst through a wall. But this is where it all started, and I love it.
Thank you, Pete. I remember the Daleks bursting through a wall in 1979, but I have a few earlier memories of that. Well, graced by Pete's presence. Pete's, now, when I did the summary at the top of this, I mentioned that extended opening and the school children and the quartet or William Hartnell. I didn't mention the cliffhanger. That has had as many votes as anything else as well. So that's emerging as a front runner. The cliffhanger and the opening, funny enough, the two bookends of this episode, I think, have been the things that have been chosen by the most people so far. But we still have 3 actors from modern Doctor Who to choose their 5 favourite things. So we've got a potential of 15 favourite things. And then we've got, everyone's a special guest. But then we're going to end it with a special guest, I think, which I think is only appropriate and I'm delighted by. But I'm going to break off now because I want to put some jelly babies and nuts in a bowl and get ready to welcome a couple of mates round to watch a Doctor Who episode called The Star Beast, which, unlike most episodes of Doctor Who, not only have I not seen 10, 11, 12, 25 times, I've not even seen once. And the excitement is palpable. It will be something in the past tense for you and you'll know all about it. But for me, as I record this, it's yet to be what it will become. Much like the episode we're talking about, An Unearthly Child, which I will return to for you in a second or two, but for me, after, I think, quite a ride. And okay, although this is the same episode, it's a little bit later. We're entering the final phase of this 60th anniversary edition of Happy Times and Places, which, as I've said several times, I'd intended to get done before the anniversary and then just to release it all on the day. But, well, the best laid plans, eh? So I have 3 more guests. Well, 3 more guests and a special guest. I mean, all the guests are special. But I have 3 more guests to tell me their 5 favourite things as fans, and then we'll see what the last guest has to offer. So this seems right because I feel now, I don't know about you, listener, I'm assuming there's just the one of you, it feels to me like the anniversary is now quickly receding into the distance, and we're heading towards Christmas, a favourite time of year of mine as an adult, because I can make it special because I'm a grown-up and I'm allowed to. And I love the festive season. So before we all get consumed in that, let's just have a last glimmer of the anniversary, because it's weird. It went in such a flurry. It's made me realize, we'll never have a 60th anniversary again. I spent mine really rather busy doing things like this, but I did get to relax and watch The Daleks and An Adventure in Space and Time, and of course An Unearthly Chld, which I'm sure many of you were doing as well, which means that not releasing this actually on the day and on the time makes no difference, because who'd have been listening to this when they could have been watching An Unearthly Chld? I wonder what our next guest was doing. He was one of the first people to reply and to contribute to this special anniversary shindig. He's never been heard on Happy Times and Places before, although he is promising me a 4-part Tom Baker story that he was one of the earliest claimants of, but not got there yet. Might need to send him a reminder. But anyway, this proves that he's up for it, because he was very quick to send me his thoughts on An Unearthly Chld. And let's hear who he is and what he has to say.
Hello, Toby. Here are my thoughts on An Unearthly Chld. First of all, the titles and the theme music segueing into the London fog with the theme tune sort of playing and the policeman going into the junkyard, that whole sequence, I don't know what they would have thought in 1963, but it's still amazing and gothic and mysterious and wonderful.
Well, there we are, straight into it, and another vote for the opening, which I think is going to perhaps be the all-out winner, which is interesting. And but nobody has described it as gothic yet, and I think a lot of us, think of it in terms of, in retrospect, of the fact that it is so different from ensuing entrances into the show. But Dan, our guest, has placed it very firmly in, as it unfolded there for the audience of the time. I suppose we have an advantage over them in that we get to experience, and we know that it is unique. But he didn't introduce himself, so let me do it for you. That is Dan Starkey, actor, the actor who plays Strax in Doctor Who, but he's also, of course, had a different Sontaran role in his very first appearance in Doctor Who, which I'm sure at the time looked like it was going to be a one-off. So he's one of the great success stories of modern Doctor Who as a performer. He was in the Sontaran Stratagem and the Poison Sky, and he was also, of course, in a Christmas special playing a different part where we actually got to see his face. He's a wonderful actor. He's done lots of Big Finish too. He's a wonderful actor, an extremely gifted voice man. I'm not bad at voices and different accents and stuff, but he is he's a proper vocal gymnast, and can do all sorts of different impressions as well as different timbres, accents, and everything else. So he's a really skilled performer, Dan, and he's a thoroughly nice and unassuming chap. And I got the chance to be with him on stage in the Quatermass Experiment in September, and I got to do quite a few scenes with him, and he was excellent, really engaged as a performer, and you felt you're in safe hands working with him. So I'm an admirer of Dan, and I'm very pleased that he has contributed to this, because he is one of us. He's a Doctor Who fan. He's a Doctor Who fan who's ended up becoming part of the on-screen mythology. So hooray for him, and I hope it's not too long before we see him in the show again, because of course he under latex as Strax, he can well, and of course he's been Sontarans other than Strax since then in Flux, so he's definitely a go-to Sontaran guy, but he's such a versatile performer, and because we've only seen his face in the Christmas special, he can, I'm sure, no doubt, return again and again in different guises, and he certainly has the versatility so to do. So happy anniversary to you, Dan. And yes, you have, I think, helped seal the opening sequence with the music going into the action over the policeman, over the fog, over the doors, onto that close-up of the TARDIS as probably the most chosen thing of the 5 things that we all love about An Unearthly Chld. Let's see what his number 2 is.
Doctor Who is always about the collision of the mundane and the cosmic, and the annoying schoolboy going, "Oh, very good," in the corridor at the start, in Cull Hill School. That's memorable.
That, my goodness, Kenneth Williams / the school children look like they're being firmed up in place as thing number 2. And Dan has, I wonder if Dan is actually accidentally compiling us with the definitive list of all of the things that are going to emerge as the top 5 favourites of An Unearthly Child. And I like that. I've always said, Doctor Who is very good at taking the everyday and contrasting it with the stuff from outer space. I've suddenly got inarticulate because I don't want to say the words that Dan said, because the point I was trying to make was that I've never said that it's a collision of the mundane and the cosmic, which I think is a wonderful descriptor of the show, and it is exactly what its appeal is that it's not just that it's about outer space and time and apocalyptic events and the strange. It's the fact that it is always contrasted with something as ordinary as, it's like when Christopher Eccleston talks about your beans on toast. That's very much the Doctor Who universe of going, this is not actually about outer space, even though we often find ourselves there. It's about how that contrasts to our everyday ordinary, and that's not as a pejorative, by the way, because it often celebrates the, in inverted commas, ordinary. So I'm not making ordinary seem like a pejorative thing, because actually what it does is it holds up a mirror to the supposedly ordinary and goes, actually, what can be found in the ordinary is as marvellous as what can be found in the celestial. And but the mundane and the cosmic, I think that's beautiful. Nicely put, Dan. And another vote for Kenneth Williams, the schoolboy. So we're doing very, very well. If he chooses the cliffhanger as well, I think those three things are very much the winners. I haven't been keeping a tally, but those of you who are minded so to do, you can do that.
When he arrives, the Doctor's Astrakhan hat is brilliant. The fact that it remains on his head, despite its improbable shape, is wonderful. And yes, frames Hartnell's face wonderfully as he finds the camera in the junkyard at various points.
I thought the hat might get more votes because I love that look. I've mentioned before the Don Smith photographs. I really like the one where Susan's slightly out of focus in the background, but is she out of focus? But she's in her hat and her coat, which we hardly see, and he's looking slightly dramatic and has his hand out. But I love that Don Smith photo shoot. I think it's gorgeous, and that is partially because Hartnell's costume is so good. Kudos to Maureen Hennigan, the costume designer, who chose the Astrakhan hat. She is still with us. She's been interviewed, I think, maybe only once. Did Richard Bignell talk to her? I think he probably did. But she lives in the States now, I believe. And Hartnell, of course, then only really has it back. He has it again in the War Machines. Interestingly, when Doctor Who returns to the present day, for the first time properly. Yes, I know he does in Planet of Giants, but everybody's small, and it's possible the bit on the Empire State Building in The Chase is the present day, but that that's just a sort of comic interlude. But for a story that is about, for a story that takes us back to now, I really think of the War Machines as the first proper occasion that happens, and he's there in his hat, and then of course he's there in the hat for when he leaves. He puts it back on. He puts on the millinery that we first saw him in order to depart. Now, I'm sure that wasn't a deliberate decision, but it's just a beautifully serendipitous bookend, a serendipitous costuming bookend to the era. And I wonder why he didn't wear it more often, because I think he looks absolutely fabulous in it. I really do. It's a really good look, and it does very much. And the mittens that he has in 10th Planet as well. It does help to evoke that sort of mysterious dotty wizard thing that he doesn't always evoke in between. He evokes different sorts of eccentricities, but that sort of fairy tale cosmic uncle type of thing going on, I think is very much evoked by the Astrakhan hat and scarf look. And it's such a good look. It suits Hartnell so well that I'm surprised more people didn't choose that. So thank you, Dan.
And, oh yes, an interesting device is Ian's flashbacks and Susan's direct address to the camera right down the lens when she can't figure out problems in 5 dimensions. That's interesting. And that's sort of a device that we don't see again, probably that I can think of until the modern series. So that's exciting, interesting too.
It is, actually, and I don't think we've made enough of that. I've talked a lot in this series of podcasts. I think I might release it as an omnibus as well, which I think will end up being 5 hours long. Can you get in the Guinness Book of Records for the longest podcast? But I know some of you do like to have it long, because I was told in the olden days never do a podcast that's more than half an hour. And I think I might have mentioned this earlier. So, somebody did say to me recently, no podcast should be more than 20 minutes. But a few of you have said, no, I like to put it on and then not have to keep stop and changing it if I'm driving or if I'm, working in the garden or whatever. And actually, I have to say, I prefer, if I'm getting my head down and doing something, I quite like to have something I know will last, the duration, so I don't have to get my phone out of my pocket and take my gloves off and blah-de-blah. So there we go. But yes, the address to camera really is, and the fact that she's looking straight at the camera because she's looking at Ian, and Ian can't, of course, be in the shot. Ditto Barbara, because the actors are in the car and they're being played in via a tape because they can't be in the flashback and in the car because of the way that television was made in those days. So they have to be inventive. So they are inventive, and isn't that beautiful? And as a result of that, we get her looking straight at us, which means we make the best of Carol Ann Ford's brilliant facial expressions and brilliant physiognomy, and adds to her feeling of being sort of hemmed in by all these people that she cannot communicate with properly because they're existing on a different intellectual and knowledgeable plane than she is. And I think it's really effective. And actors speaking to camera, that doesn't happen much in Doctor Who. And then he thinks about the Star Beast, which opens with David Tennant and Catherine Tate both directly addressing the camera. And as Dan says, it does happen in other more recent iterations of the show. I'm thinking of Peter Capaldi, talking directly to camera on occasion. And of course, I mean, Tom Baker with his sonic screwdriver doesn't work on that. But it seems more stylistically as if it fits into modern television slightly more than the Doctor Who of old. But it really works in this story, and gives it a special uniqueness in that. But it's actually born out of practicality, but it adds to the mood and to the isolation of Susan. And Carol Ann Ford is so good. It is a beautiful thing. Thanks, Dan.
And just to be all fanboy, the Doctor's speech about being wanderers in the fourth dimension, to be cut off from your own world, your own time. That's that raises the hairs on the back of the neck, which is a delight. But it's all splendid. I saw it first when I was about 4 or 5 years old, when they repeated it as part of the 5 Faces of Doctor Who, and it hooked me then. So there we go.
Oh, thanks, Dan. And I am so grateful that, stars of the show have bestowed their time upon this, man in a cupboard. I'm not even in a cupboard right now because there's those going on downstairs, but I want this to still have a little of the sprinkle of the 60th Stardust on it, so I needed to get it done. So the next guest is another actor who's a fan of Doctor Who has become part of Doctor Who's mythology, who was again brought in for a single, I think in this case a single scene, but impressed the team so much, was brought back and has embraced being part of the mythology and has embraced appearing in things, and very kindly actually got in touch with me years and years ago to offer his services for Toby Hadoke's Who's Round, and we've stayed in touch ever since, often hook up at conventions, and is a splendid chap, and has done his own shows and presentations and indeed books, I think, about Doctor Who. So let us go over to another star of Doctor Who has decided to sprinkle some of their magic on this man talking in a cupboard thing.
Hello, I'm Simon Fisherbecker, better known to Doctor Who fans as Dorian Moldovar. When the first episode ever of Doctor Who was first broadcast in 1963, I was just 2 days short of my 2nd birthday, so I have to admit I can't remember seeing it at the time. I was very poorly, and my mother told me that I was in a makeshift carry-cot in the living room, so she could keep an eye on me while she was watching An Unearthly Chld. The original theme tune was stark and distinctive, with a thumping rhythm. 60 years later, whenever I hear the first version, I get goosebumps and slightly emotional. I'm not sure why. Perhaps whilst I was gurgling away in my carry-cot, the music subconsciously fed into my psyche. Watching An Unearthly Chld many years later, I'm struck how our Full attention is grasped right from the start. You almost don't want to breathe in case you miss something. The policeman approaching the yard where the TARDIS is. William Hartnell's grumpiness is perfect, especially for younger viewers who we all know must have known someone very much like the Doctor. Seeing inside the TARDIS for the first time was fascinating. The Doctor's hat intriguing. The dialogue moves the story along quickly. And then there's the image of the TARDIS on top of a hill, having gone back in time. This first episode instantly tells us what the series is going to be like. Interesting, educational, informative, as well as highlighting social values without being political. This combination leads to viewers, now followers and fans, wanting more. All from the first episode, credit has to be given to William Hartnell. Had his portrayal of the Doctor not been surrounded, the programme may have floundered from the start. Credit, too, to Patrick Troughton being the first actor to take over a lead role so perfectly. The concept of regeneration was set, and I believe that regenerations is the main reason for Doctor Who's longevity. Recognition, too, has to go to Verity Lambert, the first producer of Doctor Who. Her steeliness and tenacity kept the show running. To add to the mystique of Doctor Who, I think it's fascinating that two actors, Carol Ann Ford and William Russell, who appeared in An Unearthly Child, are still with us to share the 60th anniversary.
Oh, that was a delightful, almost monologue from Simon. As he said, he's best known for playing Dorium in Doctor Who and has had some key speeches to say himself. He's always a delightful fellow. I haven't seen him for a while, but I saw him on the convention circuit a fair few times over the years around the 50th. That time seems to have flown, but we're still in touch. And he was very keen to take part and didn't do the traditional break it up into 5 things, but that's okay. I will go through it again and see if I can glean 5 that stick out, but I might not be able to, because it's just struck me I'm probably going to have to go through everybody's, aren't I, and tot up which are the 5 most selected favourite things and to see how they tally with mine. I suppose I have to stick to the format. I'm not wild about having to stick to formats. It's not really my thing because it involves extra work. But I know that the mindset of the Doctor Who fan is to say if we've set something up, I need to sort of see it through. So that's just added to what I shall be doing at the end of this epic set of podcasts as they approach. As they approach, they seem to recede, as I've just noticed this facet of what is required in order to box this off, which means I'll have to listen to everybody's recordings again. Well, I mean, I think the current frontrunners are still, because even Simon mentioned them. He mentioned the cliffhanger, he mentioned the opening, and much more besides, but I thought that was a very evocative and thoughtful and considered speech, if you like, about the merits of that first Doctor Who and then beyond. So thanks to Simon for his insight. And again, there are no real rules. I just wanted this to be a love-in. And what I always want from the guests to these things is for them to reflect themselves and their personality. And that is, of course, reflected in their approach and how they go about answering the call. So absolutely delighted with that. Thanks to Simon, which means we have one more actor from Doctor Who to give his 5 favourite things about An Unearthly Child. And he's not just an actor from Doctor Who. He is one of the people responsible for keeping Doctor Who's flame burning during the wilderness years that seem inconceivable to anybody, I'm sure, born around the 2000 mark and brought up in the shadow of the Russell T Davies, Stephen Moffat and Chris Chibnall eras of the show, and the brouhaha that has surrounded the 50th and 60th anniversaries when we had to endure the 30th for sure, and perhaps even the 40th, where it seemed like there wasn't much to celebrate within the very corporation that should have been, the guardian of the legacy of the programme. It seemed rather unloved and historically, misrepresented. And, we were destined to be angry old men, except that some of those then young or middle-aged men and women, when I said angry old men, I was referring to myself and my next guest. I'm aware that there are movers and shakers in the world of Doctor who are not men. But we, there was a certain section of fandom who put their noses to the grindstone, contacted their heroes, proved to be no mean writers and performers themselves, and continued the legacy of Doctor Who through the world of Big Finish. And then one of these key players, his work that he did there found him best placed when the series was looking for a key contributor to become part of the televised history and iconography of the show. And so it is with huge gratitude and an acknowledgement that this is a key player in the world of Doctor Who and a guardian of its flame when other people were perhaps getting their televisual heat from elsewhere. I hope he introduces himself.
Hello, I'm Nick Briggs. I'm the voice of the Daleks and an unspecified number of other Doctor Who creatures, and I'm the creative director and executive producer of Big Finish Productions, who make Doctor Who audio drama. You may have heard of us. So, An Unearthly Child. My 5 things I like about it. 1. I love how the theme tune just keeps on repeating into the fog and the I Am Foreman gate at the beginning. It just keeps going. Da 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 dun 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 da 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 da. I remember when I first heard that, I was utterly thrilled, and I first heard it when a friend of mine, I think his name was Simon Short, went to a Dwas convention where they screened An Unearthly Child, and he tape recorded it in the audience. So I heard that for the first time then, and I couldn't believe it was happening. I don't know, it's just weird to hear the Doctor Who theme sort of repeating like that. I also thought that the chiming of the clock was something that was happening at the venue and not on the screen. Anyway.
Well, there we go. I think that's a comprehensive victory for the opening. But of course it is, because it's got so much going for it. It's not just the theme, which any one of us could have chosen, and all of us could have chosen and probably wanted to. Not just the titles, see above, but a combination of those two things, and the fact that it has this unusual carry-on. The fact that it has an overword used, but definitely appropriate here, iconic policeman played by Reg Cranfield. The fact that it has those bell chimes that we all seem to have noticed, the fact that it goes through the doors that magically open, and the fact that the music does the dug-a-da-dung, dug-a-da-dung, which doesn't really happen anywhere elsewhere, even when the theme does carry on over opening titles and action, such as in The Underwater Menace Part 3 and elsewhere, that it goes on for so long that we get a part of the theme we don't normally hear, particularly in that era. And the fact that it's the opening of the very first episode of Doctor Who, and it is so different and memorable and surprising, even if you think you know the show. So it seems appropriate that Nick has chosen the opening, because I think that is going to end up being the most chosen thing. And what is his... and also, yes, an acknowledgement. It is Nick Briggs, voice of the Daleks. I'm sure you don't need me to steer you towards the excellent work done by Big Finish. He's also a very charming and nice fellow, and has been very kind to me over the years, and it's always nice to spend time in his company. And, he's a grafter and deserves all the success he has as the voice of the Daleks and beyond. And I'm thrilled for him that he's such an important part of the show's fabric. Number 2, the schoolboy who leans over a girl's shoulder and says, "Ooh," in a rather beautifully camp way. What amuses me about that particularly is that he doesn't do it so much in the pilot episode, and obviously by the time he has a chance to do the scene again, he really decides to throw his all
into it.
Yes! Another vote for Richard Wilson with 2 L's, the schoolboy who was so hard to track down, but I managed it. Another plug for my class reunion, Far Too Much Information, which is season 4 of Toby Hadoke's Time Travels, in which I will tell you everything there is to know about that schoolboy and all of his classmates. An unlikely hero of this Happy Times and Places podcast. There was a lot of competition, but I think, again, Nick has chosen what will feature as one of the eventual winners. I wonder if I've chosen Nick wisely. I chose Nick to finish it because he's such an important part of the show, and of course because after An Unearthly Chld comes the Daleks, and Nick is now the Daleks. But I've sort of built up to Nick, if you like, and wouldn't it be wonderful if he actually ends up choosing all top 5 favourite things? That would round it off beautifully. Although don't go anywhere, because there is one more guest, but whose contribution will be slightly different. Yes. God bless Richard Wilson, a.k.a. the Kenneth Williams schoolboy.
3, insulting, says the Doctor to himself as he looks into the camera. You know, when Ian and Barbara are remonstrating with him in the junkyard, and he does all that stuff where he's looking at all sorts of bric-a-brac, and he sort of seems to address his comments directly to the camera, and he kind of half closes his eyes and goes, insulting. I love that.
That's a second vote for insulting. Now that's interesting because it's not one that's been hugely popular, but when it was chosen, I thought, that's a one-off. Was it Dan Starkey? I can't remember. I will go and remind myself of all of these. But not the first choice for insulting, and isn't it? It's just one sotto voce word addressed not really to anybody for a brief moment of the episode, but one that means something to more than one person. That's the beauty of this exercise. That's the beauty of that episode. And for 2 people at least, the beauty of that moment. And it is. There is something rather special about it, brief though it is.
My numbering here is not working, so I'm now completely lost. 4, this is illusions indeed, says the Doctor in that inimitable way. The sort of tune of that line echoes over and over in my head. Only William Hartnell could have said it that way. And now perhaps Stephen Noonan for Big Finish.
I really like that. And Nick has brilliantly there managed to choose something that nobody has chosen yet. So there's still life in the old podcast yet that everybody thought, well, no, nobody knew I was doing this, but I thought might end up being a bit repetitive, as indeed did many of the contributors, and apologised for their potential to be so, including Nick, who said, I'm sure I've chosen what everybody else has chosen. But illusions indeed. And I love the way that he talks about the tune of Hartnell's voice. There is a sort of fluting, melodic aspect to Hartnell's delivery, particularly of that line. I can hear it now. It never really occurred to me to put it that way until Nick said that, and now I can hear it uncannily in my ear. And he does have a particular way of speaking that sort of floats on the ether and makes his Doctor, at once haughty, and at once pensive, and at another time scolding. And Hartnell's voice register is an interesting thing, especially when one hears him talk as himself in that grumpy interview he gives, where he's altogether more sort of guttural, and that sort of fluting tone is very much the tone he has adopted as Doctor Who.
And 5, as the Doctor activates the dematerialisation, Norman Kay's drums and xylophone start up. And I just like, back to the ship, child. That's just, I don't know why, it's very evocative for me. Those are my 5 things. This is me signing off.
Thanks, Nick, and continue the good work over there at Big Finish, which I'm occasionally allowed to contribute to, and always very proud when I get asked so to do. And thanks to Rob Shearman for introducing me to Nick many, many years ago. And thanks to Nick because he's a very busy man and has taken time out of his schedule to contribute and lend his lustre to this. humble audio offering. So yes, that was a very personal thing. Again, a thing not really chosen by anybody else, but it does have a little bit of crossover with the sound and the music and all of those things, and the takeoff. But it was just that particular instance, the way that Norman Kay's music kicks in just as the takeoff begins, that played a tune particularly acute to Nick's ear. So there we have it. The last of the 5 choices of a series of guests who, over the course of 5 episodes of this, it's more actual episodes than An Unearthly Chld, but I'm counting one as the pilot, so it's sort of the same. So again, it's sort of appropriate. I will now go and, I think, add up what everyone has chosen to give you a final tally, but don't go anywhere, because we have a final tally. We also have a final guest, but their contribution is slightly different from everybody else's, so I don't really need to hear their 5 things in order to find out what you, as viewers and fans and as aficionados, should have, should tally up as the kind of 5 most popular things from a cross section of our kind, but those who have been in some way or other contributors to the show or its orbit. So I'm going to go and make a tally. Well, I've digested and cogitated, as Lloyd Grossman used to say, when MasterChef was a very different show from the one it was now, and it was people from normal places making food to get sneered at by Brian Sewell, is my memory of its original incarnation. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about the original incarnation of Doctor Who. And now, obviously, there's some sort of crossover, and there are some people who've expressed different things in different ways. So, for example, music and sound has featured quite highly, but some people, choosing 3 guitars mood 2, some people choosing the TARDIS sound effect. I chose the sort of soundtrack as an overarching thing, and obviously people have chosen different lines here, and there are different aspects of that scene in the TARDIS, the entering of it, the Wanderers in the 4th dimension line. So it's not 100% easy to do a tally, but as far as I can merge it together, it seems to me that we have, coming in at number 5, I mean, I chose the quartet. Lots of people chose Hartnell, a couple of people chose Susan Foreman, but a lot of people chose Ian and Barbara, and also that had a crossover into the fact that they chose the fact that Ian and Barbara were school teachers. A couple of people chose William Russell, or something like, William Russell's lines or whatever. But there seems to be enough traction for Ian and Barbara, but with the addendum that, and the way that the story is told through them, and the fact that they are benign school teachers, as well as the performances of those two, that mean that they sort of stand out there. Although if we wanted to, we could just sort of say, well, enough people chose different members of the quartet, whilst acknowledging the other members of the quartet to go, that central quartet. But Ian and Barbara, and I think it's worth noting that a few people did specify it's because they're teachers, and that's an important element, and I think that's wise, and I hadn't really thought that would be as prominent as it was. Number 4, coming in at number 4, again, I've sort of merged together here, but it's the titles and the music. The titles and the music, which, designed by Bernard Lodge, the signal Howler, by Ben Palmer, and work from Norman Taylor there as well. And the music by Ron Grainer, realised by Delia Derbyshire and the BBC Radiophonics Workshop. The fact is they're extraordinary. The fact is they stand the test of time. The fact is they're the first thing you see, and how amazing that must have been if you had no knowledge of the show, seeing that sort of oozing out of your television and wrapping you in a strange glow of comfortable fear. And they are extraordinary, and, a lot of people pointed out, and some of the aspects of that music remain unchanged to this day. So the titles and the music, I think that's... Third, well, it's the cliffhanger, isn't it? That wonderful, incongruous image of the police box blinking forlornly on the Paleolithic, but we don't know it then. It could be any alien landscape. It's certainly not the junkyard that they left. And then a shadow of what turns out is just a character actor in furs. But the shadow of something and the perspective of that shadow falling lengthways from the corner across the screen towards that last vestige of civilization that is now the only shelter that the four travellers have. It's a brilliantly Doctor Who image. It sets the scene for many adored cliffhangers to come, and as the first of its kind, it's a pretty damn good example of the art of the cliffhanger and the very essence of Doctor Who, with its, what was it Dan Starkey said, its mixture of its juxtaposition of the mundane and the cosmic, and that seems to be at the very heart of what Doctor Who's appeal is. And number 2 is a strange one, and I think, nothing can ever be truly objective. No poll can ever be without its biases, and, and I think a couple of people mentioned this because of who they were sending their thoughts to. Joe Lister, I think, certainly did. But an amalgam of the school kids and one particular school kid, Richard Wilson's, Kenneth Williams, man. How lovely that people not even named on the credits. In fact, I'm sure a great number of listeners to this podcast couldn't even name or necessarily even particularly put a face to all of the 7 school children who inhabit the corridors and classrooms of Coal Hill School. But those unknown warriors, unknown no more, if you listen to that podcast I keep plugging, just go to show, I think, one, how we as Doctor Who fans can have affection for the most innocuous, for the most unexpected aspect of a story that might not be the best, that might not be the most important, but it doesn't matter. It's part of the great, strange mosaic that makes up our special programme, and can only be bred from familiarity and love and constant revisiting and rewatching. Probably they appeal to, they struck none of us on our first view, but this is down to the fact that we keep coming back to this story and keep looking this episode and keep looking for new things in it, and then realise how familiar some of the aspects are and yet so unfamiliar in a way. And that again gets to the heart of not the appeal of Doctor Who on screen so much as the appeal of Doctor Who off screen, the experience of being a fan, the joy of picking over the minutiae, of celebrating the uncelebrated. There's so much that speaks to, but also, yes, I have to be honest, it also speaks to this particular podcast and my particular peccadillos. So I apologise if that has slightly slanted the poll, and that most top 5 aspects of An Unearthly Chld, if you did a straw poll of all fans, I shouldn't think the school children would even come close to being in it. But this is this, and that is the result, and that is absolutely fine. I'm not going to ask for a remount. And finally, when I chose this, I wasn't sure it would be one of the things, but it was one of the things I chose. I chose the opening, and the fact that not just, and I sort of included the titles of the music in that, but the fact that it carries on with the policeman, the bell, the fog, the doors, all of that particular first few seconds of visuals up to the title card that are so much of a trademark of this particular instalment, and sum up so much of what Doctor Who is in its very, very opening moments, and yet seem so strange in context of the series as a whole. Well, there we have it. The opening moments of the episode, which have so much atmosphere, no lines of dialogue, just a description in the script, and a script realised brilliantly by its director, Waris Hussein. And so who better than to have as our final guest? It would have been remiss of me not to visit the set 60 years ago and to get somebody from it and pluck them forward in time to choose their 5 favourite things about the episode. Now, this went slightly different. It turned into a conversation rather than a series of bullet points. But from our conversation, I've managed to get, I think, 5 things that Waris was particularly keen to talk about. So it is with reverence that I hand you over to one of the key contributors and somebody who was the vision behind a large number of the things that have been chosen as your favourite things, and the favourite things of the number of guests that I had, many of whom chose just one thing, from the Doctor coughing to the fact that it exists, that something for the Rorschach print from the pilot. 3 guitars moved to. Some of these were chosen once or perhaps even twice. It's alive, says Ian. The Doctor saying insulting, that was another one that flickered briefly. The fact that it is An Unearthly Chld, not the, although then another contributor said, well, actually, I'd swap that around. So there are so many things, but many of them were the direct result of the work of my final guest, a legend in the history of Doctor Who, and somebody who was kind enough to talk to me a couple of days before the anniversary and to whisk me back in time to tell me his 5 favourite things. The first of which was, and I think quite rightly, because sometimes I think we delve deep because we're Doctor Who fans and don't want to choose the most obvious. But the first thing for Warris was, of course, the Doctor himself, William Hartnell.
The memory is, of course, having to work with a seasoned actor like William Hartnell, who had never made television before. He'd always been making movies, and as we know, it takes time to make films. And on our budget and our schedule, we had no time at all. And for someone like him, he was extremely, rightly demanding and impatient, and couldn't quite understand why there was so much pressure on him. I'll never forget him testing me to see whether I knew what I was doing, because he thought he'd met this very young guy who I was at the time. I mean, look, in the eyes of somebody who's a British member of the Second World War, his mentality was one of us and them, foreigners and us. You know what I mean?
Mm.
So who am I but a very strange-looking kid, Indian-born, speaking with an English accent. He couldn't quite make out who I was. So he challenged me on my first day. And when we started rehearsals in an outside rehearsal room with yellow tape marking out on the floor, rehearsal room floor, I suggested he move from A to B here. I'd like you to move from here to there, I said. And he said, well, I don't think I want to do that, Warris. I want to move over there. And this was a challenge to me, obviously, to my authority.
Mm.
I thought, no. I said, that's fine, Bill, if you want to do that. But you will be out of shot. I won't be able to see you on camera. And the moment he realized he wouldn't be on camera, he adjusted himself and decided to follow my instructions. That was the first thing I remember about us meeting. That's an incident, I suppose, because it closed our relationship. From then on, he began to trust me, and it was a very good relationship between actor and director. But he did test. I mean, he did test me to see if I knew what I was talking about.
Warris's next thing, because I think it was a casting, as you'll hear, that he had a direct stake in and a direct influence on, and a character whose development in the script was of vital importance to the success of the episode and, in fact, the intriguing nature of Doctor Who, and that is the title character, An Unearthly Chld herself, played by Carol Ann Ford.
How did I get to cast the show? And it's interesting because these things happen by pure chance. And Carol Ann Ford, who played the granddaughter of Doctor Who, the first companion ever, we were looking for somebody to play, a young girl to play the character. And I happened to be in the observation room at the BBC looking at monitors of a show being lined up. And I used to love watching other directors how they lined up their shots and shows. And while I was watching the monitor, I saw this girl standing around chatting because she wasn't on camera. She was waiting to go on. And I thought there was something unusual about her. She wasn't exactly a cliche-looking dolly bird in the 60s. You know, mini skirts and fringe hair, long hair, fringes. She wasn't typical of that look. So I thought, this is an unusual-looking girl. And I went upstairs to my office and called Verity Lambert in her office and said, come and have a look at the monitor and see whether this girl looks right for you. So Verity came down and we looked at the monitor, and sure enough, she thought that was the right person. And we offered the part to Carol Ann, and here we are today.
Huh.
I met Carol Ann the other day for this photographic session for the Radio Times. And 60 years ago, I mean, my God, she's a mature woman now, probably a grandmother for all I know. And there she was sitting in the makeup chair. And I thought to myself, well, isn't it odd? If I hadn't watched that monitor, she wouldn't be sitting here. So I would have thought that you as an actor would understand what I'm talking about.
Absolutely, it's extraordinary. The chants, the sliding doors, you make one choice there to do a job or not do a job, and it can change your life forever.
It does, doesn't it? I mean, she's become sort of legendary for the Doctor Who fans, and all because I was there in the monitor room.
Well, and I think she's brilliant casting. I mean, she has that sort of misty-eyed alien offbeat quality that I can't imagine anybody else doing. She has to be an unearthly child, and she's absolutely that.
Yes. So this is one of the stories I think is worth talking about.
I had a discussion with Warris that veered forwards and backwards, but we did alight upon the fact that the sound, not just the theme tune, but the sound as a whole, including the incidental music by Norman Kay, was of vital importance. So the music and the sound.
Norman was chosen by Verity, actually, but I thought he did a sterling job. And that's not to speak of the actual titles of the show, which was done electronically. I remember being at the recording of that, and Delia Derbyshire was there involved. And the first time we heard it, we thought, my goodness, is this going to really work? And as you now see, it's become a classic.
Yeah, well, that was because Ron Grainer composed it, didn't he? And then Delia Derbyshire and the Radiophonic Workshop did their magic.
Indeed, yeah.
His next thing, which I think, again, is touched on by so many other people's choices, but one that he is definitely directly responsible for, is the atmosphere of the episode.
A lot of people have told me that the first episode had a lot of suspense and strangeness about it. And the strangeness, of course, comes from the idea of a police box that you enter becomes a vast space inside. And this was something I had to conjure with. How do I do this? Because we were shooting on tape. The whole thing was shot on 4 cameras. And you can imagine that we were given only 3 tape breaks. We were only allowed that because tape was very precious. And I was acutely aware if someone forgot their lines or dropped dead, we'd have to stop the tape. But we were never quite sure with William Hartnell, with Bill, because he, being of the age he was, he wasn't used to this kind of pressure, would sometimes fluff a line, and we'd have to stop and redo it. But we didn't have to do that with him. He did it. He did get it right. So the tape break that I'm going to talk about was when Barbara enters the ship. We had to stop tape as they opened the telephone box door, and then cut to her entrance. I wanted to do it on a follow through on what today would be described as a steady cam shot. You come from outside and go straight into a vast area, because that would have been fabulous. I couldn't do that, though, because of our limitations. We were shooting under very tight circumstances in Studio D, Lime Grove. It wasn't even the television center. Studio D was where they used the newscasting from the BBC. And it was an antique place. It's now been, I'm happy to say, it's been totally destroyed and it doesn't exist anymore. But I mean, we were working with primeval material. I can't emphasize that the cameras weren't the same as the ones at the television center, which at that time was spanking new. Everything glamorous was being done over there at White City. We weren't. The studio that we were in Lime Grove, were literally, I cannot tell you, antediluvian. And to do what we had to do, i.e. to create a world of mystery and strangeness, was really a challenge. And people have said that they felt that the first episode worked on that level. Russell T was very complimentary to me about that. But, we were made to do it twice, actually, by Sidney Newman. The first time we did it was a sheer disaster because of the limitations of the facilities given to me. And I love using moving shots with cameras, tracking shots here and there, moving from A to B and onwards. But in those limited circumstances, I had the poor cameraman pushing these vast cameras from A to B. I think he got a back pain afterwards and he needed to go to hospital. But that was, I refused to give up my sense of how I shot something from, and if you look at the project, you'll see that apart from the static shots, which covered close-ups and things, there's quite a lot of movement in the camera movements. But anyway, I'm just trying to illustrate the fact that we made this thing under enormous difficulty and pressure. And no one thought that it would survive, certainly not 60 years. So here we are.
Well, and I think your creeping camera is a real trademark of your direction on the show. I think it really works, and again, it adds to the atmosphere of sort of, it's almost like you're being eavesdropped, by another character.
Yes. Well, the very first shot is actually the one that tells its own story, and we had a fog effect, and we follow a policeman, and it tracks right from a wide shot right up to the fence, telling us where we are, and it's at night. And what you do is you track up to this, it says Totter's Lane or whatever, and at the same time you got this humming sound, which is the sound that the TARDIS makes from the exterior, which we use subsequently. And that in itself is a mystery, The tracking in is always a cinematic trick, We do it all the time. Directors do it all the time. The suspense, you follow somebody over their shoulder as they walk down a dark corridor, and you never quite know what they're going to encounter at the end of their walk. So this is a classic that we use, which is the policeman leading us to where the TARDIS is in the wrecker's yard. But anyway, it seemed to have worked because people sit up and watch. They want to know what's going to happen next. And I think that's the secret of Doctor Who, isn't it?
And finally, of course, well, it had to be the cliffhanger, didn't it?
But in the end, I was very happy with what we did, because the end shot is the TARDIS stuck in that strange open area, and a shadow falling across the frame at the bottom left-hand side of the frame, and you don't know what the shadow belongs to, because you're going to leave it till next week. So that was the kind of suspense we worked with.
and it's a brilliant image. The incongruousness of the police box on the Paleolithic landscape and the strange shadow that is much bigger because of where the figure is. It really it's Doctor Who in one shot. That I think.
Yes. We shot that at Ealing. It wasn't in the studio itself. We went to Ealing Studios and shot it on film, because we could then control the lighting and the silhouette of the shadow falling. We had to do certain things like that.
So there we have it. That was supposed to be just a quick canter through An Unearthly Chld, and then a coda with a few thoughts from illustrious Hoovers and Shakers. I asked a lot of people. Most of them responded. They responded in different ways, in ways unique to themselves, their perspective and their approach as viewers and creatives. I'm grateful to them all. And of course, I'm grateful to the people from the show who aren't necessarily fans and wouldn't have watched the episode, but who were kind enough to give introductions wishing you all and the show a happy birthday and saying kind things to the listeners of this podcast. And of course, to Waris Hussain, the director of that first episode, the episode that we are talking about. And I'd like to thank all those people who were involved in its creation who are no longer with us, from Ron Grainer to Verity Lambert to David Whittaker, by Mervyn Pinfield, Sidney Newman, William Hartnell himself, Jacqueline Hill. What a ride they took us on. Aren't we lucky that when we look back to that very first episode, it's not one that we have to make apologies for or allowances for, or that sets the scene in a way that we have to rewrite its history a little bit because it actually developed in a different direction and some of the things that it established were unfortunate for storytelling terms or stylistically, and we have to kind of pretend they never happened. There's nothing we have to pretend never happened in this first episode, really. I mean, some of us, I think, like to pretend that Susan isn't the Doctor's granddaughter because we don't like the idea that the Doctor might have had hanky-panky or have a family. But she is, she says so, and that sits happily amongst the things that have endured and are perhaps talked about more. But we each have our things that we like and dislike. But I think we're all pretty united in the fact that An Unearthly Chld is very, very special. So thank you to listening. Thank you to you for listening to this, and I hope it's been an enjoyable way for you to celebrate 60 years of Doctor Who. Please continue to listen to Happy Times and Places and my other podcasts, Too Much Information and Indefinable Magic, and also Far Too Much Information, which is mostly just for patrons, and I'm grateful too for the patrons who have kept these things going and who get all of these a little bit early, and who enable them to be recorded professionally and put out there in as competent a way as I can manage, being a lone wolf in a cupboard with, albeit, some decent recording equipment. Thanks again, Patreons. Well, happy 60th, everybody. You've had birthday wishes from a companion from each of the classic eras. But I think the last word, before I head off, and, you know, even if you don't listen to me doing the next few stories of Happy Times and Places, I still have to do everything from the Gunfighters, which is coming soon, to the Wheel in Space, which nobody's actually chosen yet, via the Celestial Toymaker, the Mutants, the Curse of Fenric, and so many others. All those different stories that were spawned by this one episode of Doctor Who. But if you don't listen to all of those, maybe join me again for the 70th anniversary. And who knows, I might even get Ncuti Gatwa to tell me what he enjoys about the very first episode of Doctor Who, when, all things being likely, he is a past Doctor. That is because times and places may be happy, they may be sad, but as we get older, they seem increasingly more fleeting. But I'm going to leave the final word to the last of the very special guests, and thanks to them all, of this podcast, because it seems only right that I hand you back to the director of that very first episode, which is the reason we're all here, An Unearthly Child. I asked him if he had a message for the fans of Doctor Who and for the listeners of this podcast. So, I give you Mr. Waris Hussein.
I suppose rather, as they say, keep dancing. I say, keep watching. I don't know. I mean, with Russell T behind it, as a writer who I really admire, I think that we're in for a wonderful series coming up because he's so inventive, and he revived it, as you know, again from the time it had gone into the shadows after a pause, and he made it what it is today. And I just hope that people will continue to watch what was being presented to them. I think if they keep the essence of mystery and adventure, it should work.
Well, thank you so much for listening to all 5 episodes of this anniversary Happy Times and Places, which was presented by me, Toby Hadoke. And I'm grateful to all the guests who took part, including this episode's opening voice, John Bishop. Thanks, John. And to the contributors remembering their 5 favourite things about An Unearthly Child this time around, who were Dan Starkey, Simon Fisher-Becker, and Nicholas Briggs. And I'm grateful to the director of the episode that we've all been remembering so fondly. His name is Waris Hussein. Thanks to him and to all of those who made the legend of Doctor Who possible for the rest of us to enjoy. I'm grateful too to the patrons who make these podcasts possible. They sign up at patreon.com/Toby Hadoke, and I'm extremely grateful to each and every one of them. Music, Dave Gates. Artwork, Dylan Patterson. Please remember to support these podcasts if you can by liking and subscribing and leaving a 5-star review and perhaps a few lines of comment as well about what you like about them at iTunes, Podbean, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. And it's at patreon.com/Toby Hadoke where you get advance releases, bonus material, interaction, monthly AMAs, pictures of my dog, and it's a way of supporting the output of Toby Hadoke's Time Travels and all the other stuff that I do. It starts from as little as £3 a month. You get a 10% discount if you sign up for a year in one go, and I'm very grateful to the little community that we've built up there, and I hope it's a safe space to enjoy reminiscing and being needlessly pernickety about the history and enjoyment of Doctor Who. If you don't want to sign up to a monthly commitment, you can go to ko-fi.com/Toby Hadoke and support these podcasts in that way whenever you like, so long as you pretend you're buying me a coffee. But as I say, the thing that costs nothing and is also extremely gratefully received is any online support via Twitter, Facebook, all those rating and review places, and just spreading the word and telling your friends and making the internet algorithm that points people towards Toby Hadoke's Time Travel shiny and bright so they can see it amongst the crowd. I think you've had enough. You don't need too much of a post-credit sequence, but I think it is worth pointing out the reason that the John Bishop voice message at the top was so bad quality was because I was doing a self-tape for, an audition. It's what we do these days. We do everything at home instead of meeting people. We record them on our phones and email them in. And John's message came through as I was recording that, and he added a text going, "Is it okay?" So I thought, well, I better listen to it to make sure it's okay and then tell him, and then I'll get on with this self-tape. And so I listened to it and replied and said, "Yeah, thanks, great." And then when I came back to download it and put it on the track, it had vanished. And I Googled, and it said apparently if you listen to a voice message via text messaging, it vanishes after 2 minutes if your settings are a certain way. Clearly, the way my settings were. So then I got this thing of going, oh no, I can't ask him to do it again. He's a really busy man. And I know he was busy when I asked him because, he had to be quick and he'd asked me a couple of questions about it and blah, blah, blah. And so I sent to him at midnight, because this is when I was doing it. And I went, oh, you won't believe it, it's gone. And then anyway, I was editing the self-tape together, and I realised that what I'd done was I'd listened to it without pressing stop on the recording of my self-tape. So what you heard is me playing it back to listen to, whilst my video camera, phone, thing, picked up what I was doing in the background, having recorded a bit of the self-tape that I'd then interrupted to listen back to John. So I'd rescued it. So I texted him back, because he must have been in bed, and just gone, actually, don't worry about it, because I didn't want to make him do it again. I found it. I've sorted it out. But anyway, and now I sort of wish I hadn't texted him in the first place, say, please, can you do it again? But I wanted to, because it had happened and I was desperate. But then I recovered it anyway. So, it was as much of a disaster as much of the making of the pilot was. But it was eventually kept in all of its ramshackle glory, perhaps with a few extra clunks that were not needed, because you can pick up my steps walking across the floor as I listen to it. But in a way, as every part of this podcast has been that has kind of gone wrong and not what I expected it to, I can refer it back to the genesis of Doctor Who and the very thing that we're celebrating. And so we almost had a lost segment before we'd even begun, but I'd actually managed to keep hold of it in all its ramshackle glory. But thanks to John, and I'm really pleased that something that's nothing to do with Doctor Who, which is the fact that I've worked with John many times over the years, including when he was starting out and was such a nice guy and a talented, ascended to headline comic status before he'd been going all that long, and was the talk of Manchester of this guy that's just started doing it, who was brilliant. And the first time I met him, he was so kind, and has continued to be an awesome fellow, even though it was a bit of a shock to me when they did that trailer and there he was, and I texted him. I was like, hang on, mate. But anyway, there we go. Who'd have thought that of the two comedians on the XS Malarkey final show at one of our venues, which is called Remedy, that John Bishop actually did that show, the final show we did there before we moved. There was two comics on that bill. One of them ended up being a Doctor Who icon in the series itself, and it probably wasn't the one that anybody in that room would have expected. So well done, John. What a success he's been, and it clearly hasn't changed him, and he's still the principled, decent, and easygoing and nice guy that I know him to be from all the times I've worked with him. And I'm glad he got to feature, albeit in echoey form, on this 60th anniversary podcast that really now has to stop.